Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Tuesday, everybody. We begin with US-China developments, and first up, on the eve of the US election, the US government has disclosed to multiple media outlets allegations that PRC players have hacked into the phones of people connected to both the Trump and Harris campaigns. US-based New York Times writes that the Trump campaign team was made aware this week that former President Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, were among a number of people inside and outside government whose phone numbers had been targeted through the infiltration of Verizon phone systems. It was also confirmed by several outlets that Chinese hackers, according to the US government, who tapped into the Verizon system, targeted phones used by people affiliated with the campaign of Democratic candidate Harris. One senior US official, speaking on the condition of anonymity to US-based The Washington Post, explained that inside the federal government, quote, "We are at level 10, blinking red on China right now," end quote. US-based The Wall Street Journal, citing government sources, writes that the hackers have shown unusually aggressive tactics since being discovered last month, disturbing the federal and private sector investigators working to address the cyber espionage campaign. The hackers have attempted to re-enter patched systems after being injected from them. Investigators also discovered earlier this month that the state-aligned actor had unsuccessfully attempted to access an account held by a Wall Street Journal journalist involved in coverage of the breaches. Quote, "They are taunting us," end quote, one person involved in the response told the outlet. Quote, "What is the diplomatic messaging behind them doing it? Them showing us that they are doing it and continuing to do it after they are caught?" End quote. The brazenness of the operation, the person said, marked a new frontier in how the Chinese government is leveraging cyber activity against the US. In total, investigators now believe that the hackers targeted, and in some cases successfully compromised, at least several dozen different companies and people. Of course, Beijing denies the accusations. Indeed, yesterday, Monday, a PRC Foreign Ministry spokesperson turned the accusation around at the United States, expressing, quote, "The US created false narratives about the origin tracing of cyber attacks to frame up China. It is clear who the biggest threat to global cybersecurity is. China urges the US to stop various types of irresponsible moves to blame the victim, stop cyber attacks globally, and stop using cybersecurity issues to vilify China." End quote. Moving from hacking to the technology war, I wanted to examine an excellent piece published yesterday called "Fab Whack-a-Mole, Chinese Companies Are Evading US Sanctions" by Dylan Patel of the Semi-Analysis Substack. The long piece explores all the various ways Chinese technology giant Huawei has gotten around US chip controls. Let's look at some of the piece by quoting a few selected excerpts directly. A cat-and-mouse dynamic between US regulators and the Chinese domestic chip supply chain has ensued. In general, the regulations capture the low-hanging fruit which has slowed Chinese progress. But the US also left loopholes that are routinely exploited. For example, Huawei has been able to scoot around TSMC's weak-end consumer checks and secure thousands of leading-edge wafers through Bitman, Safego, and many other established Chinese-designed firms. While this is a huge failure in enforcement of the export controls, it's also relatively low volume compared to domestic fabrication of the Ascend 910B. Huawei has been relying on primarily SMIC to produce their domestic AI chip, and they have run tens of thousands of wafers on the main compute chiplet on their domestic SMIC N+2 7nm and N+3 6nm process nodes. Sanctions violations are egregious. SMIC produces 7nm class chips, including the Kirin 9000S mobile SoC and Ascend 910B AI accelerator. Two of their fabs are connected via wafer bridge, such that an automated overhead track can move wafers between them. For production purposes, this forms a continuous clean room and effectively one fab. But for regulatory purposes, they are separate. One building is entity listed by the US and working on advanced logic for AI chips, a clear national security concern. The other is free to import dual-use tools as it runs only legacy processors. Do you believe they aren't sharing anything over the wafer bridge? In addition to utilizing SMIC, Huawei is also aggressively snapping up their equipment for its new fab network. This is a sanctions-invading scheme, closely supported by the Chinese state. The goal is to build out domestic capacity at every step of the AI supply chain, including leading-edge logic, memory, advanced packaging, and optics. The scale and speed are staggering. We estimate that Huawei Fab Network will spend $7.3 billion on foreign wafer fabrication equipment in 2024, making it the fourth largest purchaser in the world. If SMIC and CXTM are included, both of which work closely with Huawei, they would be the second largest purchaser in the world, only behind TSMC, and far ahead of any US firm. More than half of this equipment currently comes from US companies. Here ends the direct quote. Next up, on Monday yesterday, the supreme decision-making body, the party's Politburo, held its October meeting. The stated topic was reviewing comprehensive report on the third round of inspections by the 20th Central Committee. After the Politburo meeting, General Secretary Xi Jinping, back from his trip from Russia to speak at the BRICS summit, chaired a study session, quote, on building a strong cultural nation, end quote. The comments made in the meeting are noteworthy as they touch on Beijing's ongoing efforts to influence international narratives and information dissemination. According to the readout, Xi Jinping said that, quote, China must anchor to the strategic goal of building a cultural powerhouse by 2035, adhere to Marxism as the fundamental guiding ideology, root itself in the profound Chinese civilization, and adapt to trends in information technology development, end quote. Adding that on the theme of global ambitions, quote, in terms of international influence, Xi emphasized the need to enhance national cultural soft power and Chinese cultural influence. This involves restructuring international communication, innovating online external publicity, building multi-channel, multi-dimensional external communication, actively promoting Chinese propositions and culture, conducting diverse international cultural exchanges, and learning from all excellent human civilizations. End quote. We can expect Beijing to pour more resources into its international media and other influence campaigns. Next up, we have one more development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode, as always, I have a huge favor to ask. That is just to hit the like button, and if you have not done so already, maybe consider subscribing as well. Hit the bell notification so you're on top of the most up-to-date analysis on China as it's released. The only way for the channel to grow too is if you share this with someone who you think would also appreciate this sort of content. This is also a tremendous help. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable. Thank you so much. Next up, relations between the European Union and China appear poised to further strain as European Commission nominees express a strong stance on trade and security concerns linked to Beijing. Statements from senior EU officials, including Kaja Kallas, the likely new foreign policy chief, suggest an intensified approach over the next 5 years. Kallas, known for her hawkish views, has pledged to, quote, spare no effort in defending the EU's values from systemic rivals, end quote, a category she explicitly includes China in. This rhetoric signals a growing alignment between the EU and the US in framing China as a strategic competitor. Hong Kong-based The South China Morning Post writes that nominees for key EU positions highlighted several issues in their portfolios concerning China. These include increased trade investigations, rigorous scrutiny of Chinese subsidies, addressing industrial overcapacity, managing China's alliance with Russia, and examining interdependencies that could pose security risks. This agenda suggests a strategy to curb China's economic and political influence in Europe, with EU officials voicing concerns that Beijing's approach to subsidies and industrial policy threatens to undermine EU industries. EU lawmakers have also moved to reject China's interpretation of EU Resolution 2758, which the People's Republic of China often uses to claim Taiwan as part of its territory. While largely symbolic, the vote emphasizes the EU's resistance to any unilateral redefinitions of the status quo in the Taiwan Strait, a move likely to exacerbate existing tensions with China. The European Parliament's decision has been framed as a rebuke to what it sees as China's attempts to isolate Taiwan on the world stage and assert control over international organizations. From Beijing's perspective, Kallas's statements represent a hardening EU stance that mirrors American policies towards China. Cui Hongjian, a professor at Beijing Foreign Studies University, remarked that her remarks align China with other countries the EU views as security threats, effectively pushing it into a bloc with Russia and other perceived adversaries. Some European commentators would argue that Europe is simply responding to Beijing's own moving closer to Moscow. Beijing, for its part, has warned that such rhetoric risks dividing the world into hostile blocs, making collaboration on global issues more challenging. In the economic arena, trade negotiations between the EU and China over electric vehicle tariffs remain contentious. Chinese media has reported on what it describes as double-dealing by the EU, accusing it of negotiating with Chinese companies on individual terms while maintaining an overarching countervailing investigation. Chinese commentators argue that the EU's tactics, including separate negotiations with select firms, could weaken Chinese unity in the EV industry and harm national interests. It's no surprise then that Beijing has pushed back hard against it. Amid the ongoing trade dispute, the Chinese government has advised its manufacturers to scale back plans to establish production facilities in Europe. State-owned Dongfeng Motor Group has reportedly paused its plans to open a plant in Italy, attributing the shift to Rome's support for EU tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. This move underscores Beijing's caution in expanding its footprint in the European automotive sector while trade tensions remain unresolved. Others might argue that it represents Beijing's use of select economic pressure to forward diplomatic and political goals. The unfolding dynamics between the EU and China suggest a continued struggle to find common ground. While both sides acknowledge the importance of bilateral trade, underlying geopolitical tensions, differences in governance, and security concerns appear to be driving them further apart. For the EU, China is becoming a more significant focal point of its strategic considerations, while Beijing remains wary of what it perceives as attempts to contain its global influence. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.